Until recently, one of the least explored regions of the world was northeasterly Saudi Arabia, a parched desert across which hardy Bedouins drove their flocks in a never-ending quest for forage and water. In this vast desert without rivers, streams, or even springs, the few hand-dug wells were far apart. One fitful source of water was a cistern fed by drainage from occasional winter rain. It was built more than 1,000 years ago on a caravan route from Baghdad to Mecca. Since those days, the customs and clothing of these wandering Bedouins had changed hardly at all. They eked out a meager existence in a lost world, a world that had stood still since before the dawn of Western civilization.
There's still a sort of biblical rhythm about it. If you want to know what the loaves looked like in the Bible parable, here they are, baking in Arabia today, just as they did 2,000 years ago on the shores of Galilee.
Oil is scarce in many areas today. The cause of that scarcity is not a lack of reserves or a lack of production, but rather a lack of economical distribution. To conserve the supplies of the Western Hemisphere, the logical source of oil for Europe is the Middle East. For here are more proved and readily accessible reserves than in all of North and South America together. And the region is rapidly being developed. This posed the problem of transportation. How to get the oil in sufficient quantity and at reasonable cost to the areas of Western Europe where it was most needed. The companies owning Aramco decided that the practical alternative was a pipeline system from the oil fields of the Persian Gulf, following a direct course across the Arabian desert to the Mediterranean. An overland distance of little more than 1,000
local
miles.
runabouts, the vultures of world commerce, descend on Zaid's little kingdom. They're perfectly decent vultures, just bankers and businessmen doing their job. $100 million a year is a nice piece of export market to get your hands on, especially when the place so obviously needs your help. It's a hard life in Arabia, and it breeds hard men. But it's as perfectly adjusted now to the hard land it's lived in as it was in the days of Abraham, the father of all the tribes.
Hundreds of skilled men, engineers, office workers, machinists, mechanics, pipe fitters, welders, equipment operators, and many others had to be recruited in various parts of the United States and then carefully screened. They were advised about working conditions and were hired only if they were eligible in all respects and prepared to serve in the Persian Gulf area for an employment contract period of 18 months. Then they took off from New York on an aerial journey across the Atlantic and across Europe to the Middle East. Arab laborers and craftsmen were integrated into the project. Some had already learned trades with Aramco. Others were trained on the spot. Tap-line policy from the very beginning was to employ as many Arabs as possible. Local slaves, in areas where the pipe was to be buried, the procedure was more conventional. The floor of the ditch had to be smoothed out and padded. Many of the Arabs doing this work were desert tribesmen, to whom a construction tool, even as simple as a hand shovel, was a novelty. In the tremendous program of transportation and construction, Arabs now outnumbered Americans by as many as 14 to 1. At the peak of activity, more than 14,000 Arabs were at work on the tap line project. Through on-the-job training, they were playing increasingly important roles. Most were employed through Arab subcontractors, who themselves had been set up in business by Aramco or tap line. Men who only a short while ago had never seen modern machinery were operating equipment of all sorts. As the work of construction went on, there was one conspicuous difficulty: language. At first, a few of the Arabs spoke a little English, but hardly any of the Americans knew a word of Arabic. However,
Good. What's this? Yes, say, that's the door.
That's the door.
What's that?
That's the TV.
And what's this?
While the fathers learn new manners, a few of their sons learn new tongues.
the Americans adjusted themselves to Arabian customs, too. 5 times a day, the Arab workers, all of them devout Muslims, turned toward the holy city of Mecca and said their prayers. The majority of these men, including many Bedouins, had been reared in an atmosphere that had changed little in 1,000 years. Their basic thinking remained inviolate, and they continued to abide faithfully by the precepts of the Prophet.
Islam means submission to the will of God. In the desert, there isn't much you can do but submit and pray for God's mercy.
In eastern Saudi Arabia, the Arabian-American Oil Company, called Aramco for short, discovered 5 major fields during the decade after the first commercial producing well was completed in 1938. The daily output by 1947 was over 400,000 barrels and steadily climbing.
Oil has ended the centuries of Arabian isolation. Oil means money. It's worth nearly $6,000 million a year around the Persian Gulf alone. And although most of the Arabian oil fields have been in production less than 20 years, their wealth is cracking the old life of Arabia wide open. For the first time in history, oil brings soldiers to enforce peace inside Arabia. Frontiers need soldiers to patrol them. Prospectors need soldiers to protect them. So the tribesmen who once fought each other and raided the ships and commerce of the world are paid and trained as soldiers to maintain the new law. The poachers of 1,000 years have been turned in a generation into gamekeepers.
And finally, the ready supply of oil made available by the Trans-Arabian pipeline system will hasten the reconstruction of Western Europe and strengthen it for peace.
Army engineers recently designed and supervised the construction of a large capacity pipeline across France to guarantee a steady flow of oil and gasoline to the thirsty trucks and tanks in Germany.
245, sir. 245.
Money begins to make its mark everywhere. The sheikh gets millions, the soldier only a scrap, but it buys a new life for both of them.
Through government royalties, through education, and through new industrial activities, the Arabs are benefiting enormously from tap lines.
And the engineers, among other things, are responsible for developing a wide variety of equipment. They are continually improving their road building methods in order to take care of heavier and faster military traffic.
We call these construction machines. They're also weapons of destruction. They can rip up an old road or knock down an old house even faster than they can build new ones. And in Arabia now they can and do tear an old way of life to shreds before a new one has properly begun. Not that many Arabs object. In fact, most of them are only too glad to help with the destruction of their old way of life. They can see the vision of a better life in a bulldozer, and they want a piece of it. At the wheel of this car is a man torn between 2 worlds. He's an Arab sheikh who was born in an old Arabia and will die in a new one. He worships Allah, loves the desert, and is one of the richest men in the world. His name is Zaid. His forefathers ruled the desert from the back of a camel. He rides it in a limousine. But he remains, as they were, the center of tribal life. He's the man you serve, the man you hunt with, and the man you fight for. Above all, he's the man who leads. Wherever Zaid goes, his men go too. Those who don't travel with Zaid come out of the desert to greet him. They all owe their loyalty to him, and they all expect rewards from him. When Zaid was simply the leader of a tribe, these men could meet him every day. Now he's the administrator of a modern state. He's forced to shut them out of his life. They can only wait while the world moves in and business ceases. Of course, this doesn't mean that the old Arabia has disappeared in the space of the last few years. It's still a hard land that breeds a hard people. Tough individuals like Zaid and his men, and some of them still fighting a rearguard action against the assaults of the modern world.
Behind the ripper came Arabs with wagon drills, sinking holes for dynamite where the rock couldn't leave its place otherwise. The powder monkey's job was one the Arabs took to very readily, for like people everywhere, they enjoyed setting off firecrackers.
Business.
Zaid and his men go back to the desert as often as they can. The desert is still home. On trips like this, the desert is an escape, a recovery of innocence, a return to Eden. But like all escapes, it's also an illusion. The innocence is lost. In the end, the 20th century brooks no defaulters. Here in Arabia, one of the last of the lonely lands is surrendering its old independence. From now on, its people will have to face, like the rest of us, the infinite hopes, possibilities, and disillusionments of the modern, universal world.